are doing well today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's Steps to Take to Ready Your Business Continuity Plan webinar. Today, CCSI Practice Manager Joe Goldberg will be presenting. And for those of you not familiar with CCSI, we've been in business for over 45 years, since 1974, and our core competencies include cloud services, migrating, backup, disaster recovery, cost containment, and cloud security. We also provide security services, 24/7 Security Operations Center, real-time breach detection, risk assessments, pen and vulnerability testing, DDoS solutions, secure mail, and endpoint protection. On the infrastructure side, we provide 24/7 Network Operations Center. We provide remote access and working from home capabilities, data center, IPT, wireless, and disaster recovery. We also offer 24/7 application monitoring services as well. And we also offer 24/7 hardware break-fix services, which many of you who are customers are familiar with. For any questions during today's WebEx, please place them in our WebEx chat. And I'd like to take this opportunity and introduce you to Joe Goldberg of CCSI.
Thanks, Joe. Wow, that's a lot of services we offer. Today we're going to do a webinar on steps to take to ready your business continuity plans. And I think the timing couldn't be more fortuitous. So what is a business continuity plan? Business continuity refers to maintaining a business's critical functions or quickly resuming them in the event of a major disaster, whether it's caused by fire, flood, malicious attack, or cyber criminals, or pandemic. It's kind of funny, pandemic being probably one of the least likely scenarios in most people's disaster plans, and yet here we are. It's used to maintain the continuous operations of business critical functions in the event of a disaster. It includes a disaster recovery plan, whose goal is to minimize the immediate effect of a disaster. It's usually pretty IT focused, how we can get our systems back up and running. Continuity planning, which provides methods and procedures for long-term outages and disasters. And it takes a broader approach to the disaster recovery in the continuity plan. Excuse me. There's 4 main process steps for BCP. The project scope and planning, the business impact assessment, the continuity planning, and the approval and implementation of the plan. We're going to cover all of them in kind of a high level here. So the project scope and planning, this is the first step for any effective BCP. And there's really 4 work streams involved in this. A structured analysis of a business organization from a crisis point of view. You have to identify the operational departments and what core services they're responsible for. What critical support services do you have to keep up and running, and which departments are operationally responsible for them? Senior executives and other key individuals that are going to be essential for ongoing business operations. IT and security representatives with technical expertise, and legal and senior management representatives. Legal is very often a critical component in any BCP plan. Creation of a BCP team, you need representatives from each of the organizational departments and representatives from key support departments. So within larger organizations within your company, you may need key people that are a little bit further down the chain to actually get stuff done, or people who understand how stuff works. Resource availability assessment, you need to see what kind of hardware and software and human capital you have at your disposal in the event of a disaster. Human capital is the most significant resource during a BCP process because you may have a hard time getting these people into the office, or there may be only a limited supply of people available. And what are your legal and regulatory requirements? Different businesses have different requirements. If you're HIPAA compliant, for example, you need to have a very strong disaster recovery plan. If you're just a mom and pop ice cream store, you probably don't have those same kinds of regulatory requirements. The next step is to do a business impact analysis. This identifies the resources that are critical to the organization and the threats posed It assesses the likelihood that each of those events will actually occur, and the result helps in prioritizing the commitment of the business continuity resources to various risk exposures. And there's really 8 steps in doing a BIA. You select the individuals for data gathering. These are the people you're going to talk to gather the data from each organization. Create a data gathering technique. Are you going to manually interview them? You're going to have them fill out a questionnaire, etc. Identify the company's critical business functions. What does the company do that it cannot survive without doing? Things like payroll, accounts receivable, stuff like that are critical to a company's survival. Identify the resources these functions depend on. Calculate how long these functions can survive without these resources in case the people or the machinery is not available. Identify vulnerabilities and threats to these functions. Think outside the box, you know? Don't just think of the normal, my building burns down. Calculate the risk for each different business function and document and report the findings to management. You need to identify the priorities. That's really the first step. Create a comprehensive list of business processes and rank them in the order of importance. For example, making payroll would be a critical function. Generating an annual sales report, probably a little further down the list. And you need to develop a maximum tolerable downtime. That's the maximum amount of time that the business as a whole can be inoperable without causing irrevocable damage to the business. And then you have to develop a recovery time objective, the amount of time by which the business function can be recovered. And that's the goal you're shooting for. Note that your RTO has to be less than the maximum tolerable downtime. Otherwise, your business will start suffering significant effects before you even get it back up and running. Risk identification. Risk comes in 2 factors, man-made and natural. Man-made is a hacker, is arson, terrorism, etc. Natural is things like earthquakes, pandemic, etc. A BCP team should not be concerned about the likelihood or the amount of damage in this phase. This isn't the phase where you say, well, you know what, this might not happen, or this might happen. Just collect all the risks as you see them, and then in the next phase, we do the likelihood assessment. And this identifies the likelihood that each risk will occur. It's expressed in what's called ARO, which is annualized rate of occurrence. ARO should be based on the company's history, professional experience, looking out in the market, the experience of team members, and the advice of experts. Again, a good example is pandemic is probably not a very likely thing to occur, although after this, I'm sure it's going to move way up in people's likelihood assessments. And then you have to do an impact assessment. This is the most critical part of the BCP, because this is where you analyze all the data you've gathered from the risk identification and the likelihood assessments to determine what impact each one of the identified risks would have on the business. You may not be able to account for every single risk out there, so you're going to start with the most common ones and work your way through. And then you have to do a strategy development. This bridges the gap between the BIA and your continuity planning. This takes the risks that are identified and determine which risks will be addressed by the BCP. Again, you can't account for everything. You can't account for, let's say, Martians coming and stealing your property. You know, that you can't account for a lot of things, but those things that you can and that you deem critical, that's what you're going to work on in your BCP. Once you have your BCP, the next important steps are to test it. And there's several ways of doing it. You can do a tabletop exercise. In a tabletop exercise, each team member walks through his or her components of the plan and to detail and identify weaknesses. Very often, this works in a role-playing example. For example, we do tabletop exercises with customers where we'll come in with a scenario that involves both a cybersecurity and a disaster declaration. So we can test both security response plan, the incident response plan, and the BCP plan at the same time. And you work through the disaster and see how the response is and see where there's any weaknesses and get those corrected. And then there's disaster simulation testing, where you actually fail over to a failover site or pretend that a disaster really has happened, and you actually move to all of your backup gear and your backup positions. This is significantly more intrusive, but it does give you the comfort of knowing that you can do it at the end of the day. And the last step is to continually review the plan. Technology evolves, people come and go, so the plan needs to be updated. Bring key personnel together at least once a year to review the plan and discuss any areas that should be modified. You should also be doing a tabletop once a year to ensure that the changes you make to your plan don't have deleterious effects on the plan itself. And CCSI can help you in each of the steps in this process, from creating the plan to doing the risk assessment, impact assessment, strategy development, and the tabletops and disaster recovery testing. We're more than happy to help organizations at any phase. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Joe, I had a couple of questions that had come in. One was, you were mentioning the business impact assessment. And this client was saying that their DR location is currently out of state. Does that impact the deliverables any differently, or is it just business as usual?
That's actually usually a good thing. You want to have your disaster recovery site to be, as they say, outside the blast radius, so it's 90 miles away from your primary site. It makes it a little bit harder to do disaster recovery testing because you actually have to get people over to the disaster site. But overall, that's a good thing to have them separated like that.
And another question was, would you be able just to go into a little more detail on some of the examples of ARO?
Sure. Let me go back to that slide. So, for example, you may look at a company like here on Long Island. What are the risks of a severe hurricane hitting Long Island? The risks are fair to moderate, I would say. But if you're in Iowa, the risks of you being hit by a hurricane are probably pretty slim. But the risks of you being hit by a tornado are probably higher. In California, your risks of being hit by an earthquake are much higher than your risks of being hit by an earthquake in, let's say, North Dakota. So that's different organizations need to take into account what their risks are based on their geography, the business that they're in, and just their overall experience and what risks hurt them the most. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And then one more that had come in was, you were referring to the BIA, the Business Impact Assessment, and you were saying that they just wanted to confirm, is this what you were saying should be done on an annual recommendation, or is this like a one-time project? I guess there's no regulations at this point, but the question was around with what's taking place now, that could change. But I guess initially, as part of your presentation, what is your recommendation?
Usually the full business impact analysis is only done once. It's a pretty intrusive, long process. And then during the annual review of the BCP, parts of the business impact analysis may need to be redone. So like if you formed a new division within your company, you would need to run an analysis just on that new division and how it kind of integrates with the others. But that would be done on through the review process, and stuff like that would come out during the tabletop test as well.
Thank you, Joe. Those were the questions that I saw, that some of the ones that had come in. Any of the other people that have joined, are there any other additional questions that you'd like to ask at this time? Well, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Your account managers will be following up with you to discuss next steps. Again, thank you again. Have a great day and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.